Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to Barnes& Noble Midday Mystery. My name is Rachel Harrison. I am the author of The Return, Cackle, Such Sharp Teeth, Black Sheep, The Collection Bad Dolls, and tomorrow, So Thirsty will be out in the world. And I'm here with one of my favorite authors, Alexis Henderson. Alexis, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Alexis. I wrote The Year of the Witching and House of Hunger, and then my book, An Academy for Liars, comes out next week. And you are also one of my favorite authors, and I always jump at the chance to talk to you and be in events with you. So this was like so exciting for me, and I absolutely loved your book. Can you tell us a bit more about So Thirsty, which I also have right here?
Ah, so it's bad because I'm always like, so, and then I start talking, but the title of my book also has so in it. So I'm always like, so thirsty is about Sloane Parker, who is about to turn 36, and she's feeling despondent and kind of checked out of her own life. And her husband gifts her with a birthday weekend trip, not with him, but with Sloane's best friend and troublemaker extraordinaire, Naomi. And the two of them go to a cottage in the Finger Lakes. And Naomi is hell bent on breaking Sloane out of her rut. And in doing that, she accepts an invitation to a party from a stranger, and things go awry and changes their lives forever. Um, so that's out tomorrow. And next week, An Academy for Liars is out in the world. Can you tell us about An Academy for Liars?
Yeah, An Academy for Liars is kind of like fantasy horror, and it follows Lennon Carter, whose life is also kind of falling apart at the beginning of this story. And she's very troubled, and she gets a very mysterious phone call from a university that she does not have any recollection of ever applying to, and it invites her to kind of come sit for this entry exam. The university is called Drayton, and it's set in a secret pocket of Savannah, Georgia, and there she learns how to practice like a questionably ethical form of psychological magic called persuasion. And you can probably imagine chaos ensues. So yeah, that's An Academy for Liars. I'm so excited to kind of like dive into talking to you about these two books because I felt like our characters kind of were like echoes of each other in a weird way. When I picked up So Thirsty, I was like, oh my gosh, like another character whose life is kind of almost at rock bottom when you first pick up the book. And I thought that was like a cool similarity. And I wanted to know kind of more about how your approach to writing a character that's kind of struggling at the beginning instead of having things all figured out and kind of like building off of that unlikable, and I'm putting that in quotes because I happen to really like your main character a lot, but I think that like an argument could be made that these aren't necessarily like warm and fuzzy characters. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard to strike a balance of getting a protagonist who people root for, who is also who's at like rock bottom.
Yeah.
And because I feel like we are inclined to be like, just deal with it, get like pick yourself up, or like it's hard to have empathy, I think, when we recognize in others that like we bump up against some things that we see in ourselves. Like for Sloane, she's really passive at the beginning.
Mm.
But to me, that's the most fun place to start with a character because you get to build on that arc. And hopefully by the end of the story, they're in a better place than where they started. If they start in a good place, you have to figure out what's their challenge, what's their journey. If they start at the bottom, like you can only go down so far from rock bottom. Did you feel similarly about Lennon?
Yeah, I think so actually. I at first I was like, how am I going to get people to like this person? Because I really liked her, but I felt like she's just kind of made some decisions that are difficult. And I think the passivity is like another thing that's kind of difficult for some people to grapple with, like myself included. Sometimes I just want to shake her and be like, why won't you do something, you know? But at the same time, I feel like, yeah, there's just so much room to grow. And it's also, I think, really satisfying to see a character who's at rock bottom, like kind of claim their own power, which is something I also really loved about your book. Like, I won't want to spoil anything, but like the last few scenes of your book were just so satisfying to me and so great to like see. I don't know. I think, yeah, I think it's really fun to watch that trajectory. So,
Yeah. And I'm curious because this, all of your books are so imaginative. And I just like want to live inside your brain and see what happens. Like your imagination like astounds me.
Thank you.
When you started writing an Academy for Liars, did you start with Lenin? Did you start with character, or did you get like the concept of the Academy first?
I started with Lennon and Dante. The Academy actually didn't exist in the first version of the story. I think it's kind of crazy to even say now because that's like literally, the genre where it sits
Yeah.
on the shelf there. I don't really remember hearing much about Dark Academia when I was like first writing this story. So it was years before, and I think it was kind of before it hit the trend kind of hit its peak. And the book was set in kind of like a second world fantasy sci-fi-ish setting. I think the whispers of the sci-fi are still present in the story, like more so than I think I realized when I was writing it. There's definitely science fiction elements, but it's more grounded now. I think the story kind of opened for me when I set it in Savannah, Georgia, which is where I grew up. So, what about you? How much did the story change from its first draft? Like, did you know going in what the story was going to be, or was it something that kind of evolved a lot?
It did evolve. I think I started with this idea of like Thelma and Louise with vampires,
Mm,
but originally it was more about aging.
mm,
And all my books, I kind of think of, I start with like a theme or a topic or an issue I'm dealing with that I don't want to be dealing with in life. So I'm put it in my book. And I was thinking a lot about aging and getting older and feeling like life is passing you by. And the metaphor really opened up from there. I came up with the title So Thirsty, and I never come up with my titles first. Like my titles are always like the last thing. And this is the only book I've ever done where I had the title first.
it's a fantastic
And
title.
I was talking to Jess, our editor, and she was like, if you're going to have a vampire book and you're going to call it So Thirsty, there might be an expectation that it's a little bit sexy. And I was like,
Mm,
fair. And I sort of took that and ran with it. And it became from there, like the vampire metaphor opened up to be more about not just aging, but desire. And vampires are such a good avenue to explore desire because
yes.
they need what they want. And for me, I feel like my whole life, deprivation was like equated to goodness
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
indulgence was bad.
Yeah.
And sort of flipping that on its head really changed the course of the story and changed the vampires, and everything sort of opened up when I thought about it that way. So it definitely changed a lot for the better, I think.
It's fantastic. And I really did love the way that you explored like desire and aging and friendship and the ways that those things all intersect.
Yeah.
It felt like it was like a tapestry that was woven like perfectly, like so tight. It was really perfect.
You.
Yeah.
I like am very curious about how, because you said the story changed a lot, and it was originally Lennon and Dante, which I ship like Dante. But um, how did you, because Drayton came later, how did you go about like world building? Because the Academy felt so real. Like all of your fantastical settings feel like real places. So how did you go about like, where did the ideas come from? How did you build it out? Did anything change or evolve as you were going?
I think um when I knew that I wanted to set the book in Savannah, I think that's where I really unlocked, a sense of groundedness. At first, the note that I got from our shared editor, Jess, was that it felt way too surreal. It just like didn't have its feet on the
Mm.
ground. And so I took that very literally, and I was like, okay, what is a place that feels more real than any other to me, like very grounded? And my thoughts just took me straight to Savannah. That's where I grew up. I spent so much time in downtown Savannah. I know my way around that city. I tend to move a lot, but that's a city that I feel like I know. And so I set the story there, and I think that it became easy for me to kind of let my own imagination run wild within this city that I knew. It felt very homey, and I missed that place a lot. So I think that once I had that, it was almost like it gave me license to explore all these really surreal and weird things, magical elevators, and like rats that are kind of achieving sentience, and like all of these like characters who are a mess and their relationships are falling apart. There's a lot of chaos and strangeness in the story, but because Savannah is such a touchstone for me, I was able to kind of build that into something that seemed like coherent, and or at least I hope it
It
seems
does.
coherent
Yeah.
and not not too kind of far-fetched, because I think that, that's definitely a risk when you're writing fantasy. Sometimes, you need the story to have a beating heart. And I think also really getting to know Lennon, diving deep into her story and making the things she struggles with, feel at least relatable and human to me, really helped me create a story that I think felt real despite all of the surrealist elements and the magic.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because Savannah is a real place. It did feel like grounded. It did feel like it could happen. It's my favorite kind of story where it's like, what's behind this door? Like, am I going to open it up and it's going to be like a magical land I've never heard of? And just like the phones, everything was just so, every detail is just so rich and perfect. But you're right, like having it in a real place makes it feel real, which is exciting. And it does feel like, even though the characters are in fantastical situations, like everything about them that's messy felt very real.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you.
I
I
just,
felt
it's
the same way about your book. I actually, one of the questions I wrote down that I've been dying to ask you. I actually thought about like DMing you to ask you about this, but then I was like, you know what, we're going to be an event and this is a great thing to
save it.
talk about. I'm sure other people have like questions for you too. And maybe they would like, maybe other people would want to cover the same ground, but I wanted to ask you how you make your character relationships, particularly your friendships, feel so lived in. I don't think that there's any author on planet Earth who writes a female friendship the way you do. I I love the way that you do it, and I don't know how you make it feel so real. I'm like, this is me and my friend. Like I thought, like you write thoughts that I thought I was the only person who I had thought that about, a friendship or myself. And I think, yeah, I wanted to know more about your process, how you create that.
I think just like you said, where it's like, I feel like we all have these thoughts about our friendships, but I feel like we don't talk about them. Like
Yeah,
there's this stress in particularly, I think, female friendships where we don't want to acknowledge jealousy. We don't want to
yeah.
acknowledge resentment, where we feel a lot of fear because I feel for me at least, I'm so attached to my friends, so attached to them.
Mm,
Like they are my lifeline in a way that's more intense than my romantic relationships. Like if losing a friend feels like losing a part of your soul. And I think they're leaning into the intensity of the friendship and acknowledging the intensity of the friendship helps me acknowledge everything about them that's beautiful and everything about them that's ugly.
mm,
And just be honest about that in my books. And it's interesting because none of the dynamics of the friends in my books are like a one-to-one dynamic of me and a friend of mine. I try and steer clear. Like
that
my
would be
friends
bad.
aren't in my books, like, but there are moments where I'm one of my best friends is an author named Courtney Price. She wrote a book called Welcome Home, Caroline Klein. Shout out to Courtney and to Caroline. But there's banter in this book that feels like banter I have with Courtney. But then Sloane and Naomi have been friends since they were 14. And one of my other close friends, Deanna, I've been friends with her since I was 12. And
Yeah.
like we used to hang out at the mall and be mall rats. And like that's part of it. So I borrow, I think the specifics I borrow and pepper in, but like the broader strokes and the emotions, I just touch from like pull from tension or feelings that I've had in my own life and own relationships. But I think they're all universal. Like all of our feelings are universal in any relationship that is that intense. Um, my favorite relationship in your book was Lennon and Dante because I'm just like, oh my God, he's so hot. but
Thanks.
but how did you go about making that like adding the tension? Because it's a very like push-pull and mysterious relationship, but it didn't feel by the book. It didn't feel like enemies to lovers. It felt like completely fresh. How did you go about writing that relationship?
Well, first, I should say I was actually really scared to write that relationship because I think there's a taboo element, given that he's kind of in a position of power over her, not kind of, he is, as her
Yeah,
like
yeah.
protector and mentor. But I knew that I kind of wanted that relationship to reflect a kind of a core theme of the book, which is, kind of power and what we choose to do with it. So having a relationship at the center of the book that kind of explored a power imbalance felt really right to me. Whether or not the relationship itself is right, I think is a kind of a question that's kind of left up for grabs. Like, I think there's different opinions on that, but for me, I just kind of wanted to focus on the way these two characters connect, and I think that they're kind of flawed in similar ways. I think um, they're also very different, and trying to figure out how those two would puzzle piece together was really fun. Um, I also kind of wanted to like play with the dynamics a bit because I think that the idea of like, a student falling for her teacher, we're usually thinking of a power imbalance that's quite steep, and I'm not saying that this one isn't, but Lennon is, she's in her 20s, she's coming off of a broken engagement, so she's kind of lived a bit, and to see how that same dynamic works when it's like two grown adults who kind of have their own baggage and how they choose to handle and unpack that within the context of a relationship was really fun. So I think that was like a touchstone for me, was just trying to kind of look at who these people are and what they're bringing with them into the relationship and how they are going to sort through that or butt heads. It was really fun. I also think it's also fun to write a romantic relationship where you're like, oh, these two would be friends, or they would be enemies, or they'll be lovers, and you just kind of don't know where it's going to fall. And I feel like
Yeah.
any one of those things could be true of these two. So I like to kind of incorporate elements that almost seem like they're from like a different relationship. Like I think that like one thing I liked about writing Lennon and Dante is that there's a little bit of like bro-ishness. Um, and
There is. Yeah.
yeah, I kind of like I was like, oh, these two are bros. Like I could totally, see that. And yeah. Also like your characters too, like Sloane and Naomi also have a bit of like a bro-ish vibe that I love. I was like, do you guys need like a third friend? Like, can I just
Yeah.
slot myself in
To
here, please?
balance it out. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's I think it's fun writing relationships that are not entirely healthy because I
Yeah,
feel like a lot of our relationships in real life not entirely healthy.
that's
It's
so
I think
true.
more common to have relationships that are a little bit unhealthy versus relationships that are purely healthy and sunshine and rainbows and like you have an issue, let's talk about it. We'll talk it through and then everything's fine. Like most of the time in our relationships and our lives, it gets messy. And I love that
Yeah,
about Lennon and Dante because it didn't feel predictable. And I think that's what made it so exciting. And
thank
you
you.
touched a little bit about on morality. And I think that's such a fascinating aspect of an Academy for Liars because they're working with this art of persuasion, like lying and like swaying people. How did you feel about writing about that topic? And how did you strike a balance to like not, because I don't think the book takes a firm stance. It's just kind of presenting it as a question. Was that intentional?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I consume a lot of fantasy novels. And one takeaway that I have, no matter what I'm reading, whether it's like a middle grade book or like, a dark fantasy, grimdark for adults, is that the way magic is practiced is oftentimes a little bit of a breach of consent. You are meddling in people's minds, changing what they see or changing what they believe. And you're usually not asking them, is this okay before you do it? Like magic is just like, you take what you can get, you use your power, it's yours. And I think that that's like, again, like problematic a little bit in an interesting way. And I love writing books that kind of deal with that. Like it was a question that kind of not bothered me because it's not like I'm angry when I read a book with
Yeah.
magic in it, but I was like, this isn't, even when it's presented in a way that's supposed to be like a good thing, magic is like, supposed to save the world or like people do good things with it. It's kind of, there's still this like moral issue that sits kind of close to the core of practicing magic on other people without asking them permission first. So I think that that's what I wanted to explore with an Academy for Liars, and it was really challenging. And I don't know that I really came away with an answer for myself. I just wanted to kind of point out all of the different and problematic ways that this issue could present itself within a story. I think that's especially true when you kind of give that power to a character that's not entirely stable, not entirely moral. It creates chaos, and I love mess when I'm writing. So, and
That's the
how
moral
did
of this.
you?
We love
We
mess.
love mess. New name for the panel. How did you tackle that in So Thirsty too? Because I think it's also like a very similar question. It's the heart of your book too. It's like these people are vampires, and once you become a vampire, you have this moral dilemma. Like, do I kill to survive or not? And I love the way that Sloane and Naomi sort of grapple with that. Naomi less so. Naomi was pretty Naomi was pretty okay. And I love her for that. But how did you approach that while writing So Thirsty?
I think it was it was fun because it was like the two sides of the coin, which is Sloane, who always deprives herself of the things she wants, which is not healthy, and then Naomi, who takes what she wants and then justifies it later. And now, like they did that in their lives before, but now it's just now that they're vampires, it's a little bit dicier. um, and so I kind of tried, it's hard because when your protagonists turn into a monster, you don't want them to just go on a killing spree because and So Thirsty, they're not monsters at the beginning of the book. So if there was just like, surprise, they're vampires and now they're killing everybody, it'd be like kind of a big jump for the reader. Um, so it was hard to like make it gradual and to have it like feel not too jarring or violent or like just completely horrific where I lose the reader and they're no longer on their side.
Yeah.
So it was definitely like a tight rope to walk. But it also is a horror novel. So like it's not
I
like
mean,
it's a straight, obviously it's a vampire book. So there's gonna be I felt a little bit more freedom to be like, yeah, they can go for it. They can rip out this guy's neck. Like
I loved it. I loved it. Also, there's a scene in a water tower. I'm not gonna like spoil it
okay.
for anybody, but eyes were wide open at like 3 a.m. I was so scared. I was terrified. And I think it's interesting how you create a spectrum almost from like, okay, this is morally like not the worst, and then like the very worst, and where they fall
Yeah.
and how they choose to kind of handle that. I thought it was really interesting because you're almost like creating your own system of morals within this world. Yeah,
Yeah, they're
and how
bad. They're
Sloane,
not that bad.
right,
That's
and how
kind of how
Sloane
I
has,
see
yeah,
it.
and
It
how
could be
she has to
worse.
kind of figure out where she falls in this new reality. And I think you did it so convincingly because it made complete sense. And I was like, I can totally see why they made the choices they made at those moments because, they're not human anymore. They are other, they are different.
Yeah.
And I think that it was cool to see how they kind of let go of these human conventions of morality. So yeah, yeah.
Um, in when you were writing your Lennon and her journey, did you run into any like sticky parts where you like weren't sure what decision she was going to make? Because she has so many crossroads in the novel, and it was just like always fascinating to see which way she went. And I was curious, like when you wrote up to those crossroads, did you ever get there and were like, crap, like which way is she going?
All the time. This book was impossible to plot because of her. I just she was absolutely unpredictable. And I think it's interesting because my previous two books, the characters are pretty moral people. So I can kind
Yeah,
of guess what they're going to choose because they're going to make a decision that doesn't hurt people or protects people or is conventionally more of the right thing to do. Um, Lennon is completely a wild card on that front because I would say in some ways she's a bit more selfish, she's a bit more ambitious. And so she factors in other people's feelings and safety and all of that, but it's not the basis of her decision making. She kind of has her own agenda. So it was really difficult to kind of plot her and figure out, like, try to stay two steps ahead of her. I just kind of eventually gave up. It was like, okay, you're in the driver's seat now. You're going to do what you're going to do. You're probably going to wreck the car, and I will watch and like, write it all down. And that's kind of what I did. I felt like I was chasing her for half the story. So yeah, it was.
I feel like that's part of what's exhilarating about the reader experience too, because I felt like that too. But I was like, yeah, crash the car. Like I'm ready for it. Let's go
That's how
for
I felt when I was reading about Naomi too. I
it.
love that character. She's absolutely wild, and I think her kind of dynamic with Sloane I thought was so it was both like sometimes a little toxic, but there's also this real tenderness and care and safety within that relationship. And I feel like in some ways, like Naomi can be who she is because of Sloane.
Yeah.
And I love that element. So how did you go about building a character that was like kind of in some ways so wildly different than your main character? Like how did you create the wonder that is Naomi?
I think she's like just every wild impulse that I don't act on, or like I am Naomi like twice a year on like a rare moon, like the stars align and I turn into an absolute menace. And like in those, like I've had moments where I've been just like, I've felt it. Like I'm stepping off the edge and I feel it and I'm into it. And like I was just channeling. And then I wake up the next day, like, what have I done? So like I was just channeling like the rarest moments, the moments I've had where I've felt the most alive and the most unhinged, I kind of just channeled into Naomi. And it was also kind of easy because I locked into Sloane's voice because I write very close first person. So I locked into Sloane's voice, and then I was just creating the perfect counterbalance to Sloane.
Mm.
So it was easy to like be like, well, what does Sloane need in this moment? And Naomi's giving it to her. What does she not need in this moment? Naomi's giving it to her to like create the tension. So it was kind of like ping ponging against that and having that be the central dynamic. Was did Dante kind of act like that for you to kind of like have Lennon kind of bump up against him and then, or was he just sort of like his own thing?
I think that it was very much the case. I think if I had to say, Dante is definitely the Sloane of the relationship, a bit more
Yeah.
grounded, a bit more mature, although he has his moments. But I think that like, yeah, like this kind of counterbalance or something to kind of bristle against or brush against. It's really an interesting dynamic that I wanted to play with. Because I think when you have a character that's a bit of a wild card, they need someone to ground them a little bit. Especially because sometimes a story can just spiral out of control. And I think Dante was that for Lennon in an Academy for Liars. He was one of those touchstones, much like Savannah. I think I just needed like a bit of a constant to settle things down. So yeah, for sure. For sure.
That's so fascinating. I could ask you questions about this book forever, and I probably will continue to bother you. But we got so many great questions from people who are tuning in. I want to open up to those. So I'm going to do one, and then we can both answer, and then I'll kick it over to you. This one is from Katie, and she says, "Do you see yourself in any of the characters?"
Great question. For me, I think I see some of the parts of myself that I want to hide in Lennon for sure. I think in my book there's this idea, it's a common like idea in psychology of the id, like a kind of a darker version of yourself, and I think Lennon is that for me in some ways. Um, so yeah, I think she's there. There's a little bit of me in some of the minor characters too, but I think for the most part, this is one of those books where I put the characters represent things I want to hide about myself. So I like to not draw too many direct parallels because I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
want to be seen like that. I don't want you guys knowing too much.
Yeah, I relate too. I mean, it's always funny because I remember when The Return came out, someone was like, "Oh, these characters are unlikable." I was like, "But they're all me." Like,
Me too. I had the same thing with like when I've seen some people who are like, I hate her, and I'm like, okay,
okay, everything's fine.
fine. Yeah.
I would say I'm definitely more of a Sloane than a Naomi, but like there are all my characters are parts of me. Like I feel
Yeah.
like to make them real and to like for me to make the writing authentic and worthwhile, I have to explore something that comes from me
Yeah.
because I think, you know, there's something universal in all of our experiences. And I think leaning into what's specific about our own experiences, like it's always surprising because people will connect with that. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think they're all me. I relate to them all. I see myself in all of them.
Let's see. I'm going to choose. Oh, this is a great question. They're all great, but what are the ways you decompress from some of the horror and tense writing you create? And that is from Kaylee. I thought that was a fascinating question.
Interesting because I think my books like straddle a line so they don't get too intense. I remember when I was editing Such Sharp Teeth, I like was watching a lot of BTS music videos. Like I got really into BTS while I was like editing that book because that book is kind of personal. It's kind of deals with some sticky things. So that was like my outlet. But for the most part, I don't my books aren't so dark that like sitting in them is like too intense.
Mm.
But I feel like I used to watch The Bachelor. That used to be my brain vacation, but then that got too dark.
Yeah, it's
Like
got really dark
yeah,
lately.
they were like, and they always broke up, and I was like, I was emotionally invested. Like so that's not my brain vacation anymore. Um, Sometimes I'll watch like House. I need like trash TV
Yes.
just in general to function in life.
Yeah.
But how about
Same.
you?
I totally agree. I think like trash television is what I lean on. Like, so I'm probably gonna like binge watch like The Secret, like what is it called? The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Like any new Yeah.
Have you seen it? Is it good?
I haven't seen it
All
yet, but
right.
I'm going to. I already know I'm gonna love it, but like that sort of thing, I can turn my
Yeah.
brain off. And I think I'm also a pretty sunny person by nature. So I think when I'm not doing the horror thing, my life is pretty like, a lot of sunshine and colors. And like I'm
Yeah.
wearing black right now, so it's not a good
Yeah.
representation, but like my office does not look like a horror author lives here. So I think that's how I balance it. Most people in my real life are like, there's no way you write horror. Like they just don't
Yeah.
believe it. They're like, what part of you writes this stuff because it's just kind of different from how I come across. So I like that though. I think it gives me a good outlet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's interesting because people who write the darkest stuff are the loveliest people. Like the darker it is,
The
like
nicest people you'll
Eric
ever meet.
LaRocca is one of my favorite human beings, like the sweetest, most like amazing person, writes the most beautiful, most messed up stuff you will ever
Terrifying.
read. Yeah,
Terrifying.
it's
I can't believe.
yeah, and they're just like every time I go to a horror convention, it's like I leave in the best mood, and then like I'm like,
Right.
oh yeah, that person wrote that. What?
Right. It's hard to believe. I feel like I've heard other people say, I hope I'm not being biased here, because I've heard other people from other genres say that horror authors are by and large the warmest and the nicest.
Yeah,
Like it's just kind of it's
we put
weird.
it
I don't
all in
know.
here,
Exactly. We
and
get all of our
then
angst out and then we're just like, we just want to
yeah.
chill.
Um, what is your favorite horror romance story of all time?
Oh, that's so hard. Oh, no. The one that came to mind first was Twilight, which I know
Say
it's not
loud and
tech.
proud.
I love Twilight so much. Like I'm obsessed with it. This is my second event in a row where I've talked about Twilight. Because I don't know, there's just something about it. And an argument could be made that Twilight is not technically horror, but I am I think you have to like some of the scenes in that book are horrific, like truly,
Yeah,
especially the last one. So yeah, I really like that pairing, and I think it's just kind of like imprinted on me. So
imprinted.
yeah,
Um,
that was accidental. Oh my God, brain rot.
no, no, I Twilight's great. I've never read the books, but I've seen all the movies, and they're really fun. And like, so many people wouldn't love it if there wasn't something there.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think it's
I
campy. It's fun. Yeah,
yeah, I have a lot of camp, and like they're all hot, and like it's
right. What more
angsty.
could you
Like
want?
it's perfect. Um, I recently watched Lisa Frankenstein. Have you seen it yet?
No.
I absolutely loved it. It's Diablo Cody. It's
Oh,
like 1980s, like girl reanimates a corpse, and like it is campy as all hell, bright colors, violent, and it's just like so much fun. I had so much fun with that movie. If you haven't seen Lisa Frankenstein, anybody, I think it was on Hulu. Maybe I'm lying. It's streaming somewhere,
I'm
so
gonna
go
watch
watch
that.
it.
Let me see. I'll find us another question. Okay. This one is from another Rachel. Who is your favorite character that you've created in your book and why?
I think in So Thirsty, I'm gonna go Ailey. He is like this ridiculous, like I don't know if anyone has seen this TV show Barry, but there's a character called NoHo Hank, and he's a Chechen gangster, but he's so lovely. And like I just love that character so much. And when I was writing Ely, I kind of wanted to write a character who had that vibe where it's like he's dangerous and he's messed up, but like, hey, he's just here to have a good time. Like he's just like, like wearing a shirt that's like not buttoned all the way, chest hair, like
Love
super
it.
hot, but like super goofy. And I think it was important for me to have that character in the book to kind of counterbalance the intensity and like a little bit of comic relief. And I think of all the characters in all my books, there really hasn't been a character who's kind of just there for comic relief. And Iwi kind of acts like that. And he's just very pleasant and like would be so much fun to hang out with. So definitely Illy. What
I
about
love
you?
Illy. I want an Illy novella so badly.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Right? I feel like it'd be really good. I would be first in line to buy it. For me, I have kind of two. One is Dante, but if I'm being totally honest, it's Lennon's rat, Gregory. I love
Gregory.
rats. I had a rat when I was little, and they're very dear to me. Um, so yeah, I think I just love any animal character. I get overly invested. Like I was watching a kangaroo documentary recently. Within the first 5 minutes, I started crying because I was like too invested in this baby kangaroo. So I think I just tend to like, I love writing about animals. And yeah, that's probably my favorite character.
That reminds me, if people need a brain vacation, there's a documentary that just came out on HBO called Chimp Crazy, and it's by the guy who did Tiger King. It's absolutely wild and it's a lot of fun. I haven't watched the finale. I think it came out last night, but brain vacation, like goofy out there, world you've never heard of, cute chimpanzees. Well, it gets a little dark. I don't know if that's, they're like, I love animals. I'm like, watch this chimp
Well,
doc. It's not, yeah. Anyway, let me find another question before I continue to, um, we kind of answered that one. Okay. What approach strategies do you use to conceptualize the plots in your book? How much is tied to current events? Are you already working on the next book?
I think with I have a different process with every book. I think every time I start, it's almost like my first time at it. I start from square one. I think I use a lot of the story beats from like Blake Snyder to kind of just get the bare bones. I like to know what I'm writing toward, but I don't need to know necessarily the blow by blow of how I get there. So I leave things sort of on the page. And as for research, I think I didn't have to do too much for an academy for liars, honestly, because I know Savannah so well. But when I do a lot of research, I tend to do all of it almost before I start writing. And then I just rely on what I know. If there's something I don't know, I kind of highlight it, I mark it, and I circle back to it and follow in the following draft. Because otherwise I go through like research rabbit holes. Like for the Year of the Witching, my main character is a shepherdess. And I researched a lot about like sheep and shepherding and all of this stuff. But then like I remember one day I went down like a 2 hour rabbit hole of research for this like one little detail I ended up cutting about like sheep and sheep like husbandry and birthing. And I was like, I'm not going to do that again. So I do it beforehand and then I flag things that I need to like fact check later.
And then the second question was, are you already working on the next book?
Oh yes, I am. I'm working on three right now. So my brain is being pulled in three different directions. I four if you include this one. So yeah,
Wow.
they haven't been announced yet, but
All right.
I'm powering through.
That's the best news ever that we get three more. Like this is like Christmas for me. Um, I'm kind of similar to you with uh like plotting. I'm not the best at plotting. I like get an idea and I just want to like get down and like would prefer to just like be off to the races, but it's for the best that I don't because like earlier in my career I would get like 30,000 words into a book and then be like there's nowhere to go. And so I try and like write like a general idea of where I see it going, what the meat is, who the characters are. And then it's important for me, like you, to like leave room for exploration. Like I can't map everything out perfectly because then I feel like I lock myself in and don't explore possibilities that like lead to something better.
Yeah,
Um, my books really aren't tied to current events at all. I don't do a lot of research. Like you, I would fall into rabbit holes, and I'm just not a very skilled researcher. I think it's something that you
same.
either have or you don't. And
Yeah,
learning what your skill set is and how to lean into that, I think, is an important part of being a writer.
so
Um,
true.
I have a draft of the next book done. Um, I will be going into edits soon, so pray for me. But that hopefully will be out next fall.
I cannot wait. Oh my gosh. I already know like fall for me and your books are just like this. It's not fall without a Rachel Harrison book. Seriously, I have to have them. I'm like the season has started. Once I see like all the promo for your books, I know I'm in for a good time. So excited.
Thank you.
Let me pick another question. I already have my eye on one because I'm very curious. What does a typical writing day look like for you? And this is from Cassidy.
So if I'm like locked in on a project, I try and get up early. I get up like 5:30-ish, make myself coffee, sit there. I like to like wake up when it's like still dark and like have that be the first thing. And then I will write until like mid-morning. Then I'll go for a walk. I need to like get out of my chair and like step into my body. go for a walk, have some lunch, come back, work throughout the afternoon, and then in the afternoon, late afternoon, I'll take another breather and I will again move my body, try and exist in the world, make some dinner. And depending if I'm like, if I finished my writing goal during the day, then I take the night off. But if I like have a word count goal that I didn't hit, or like a page count if I'm editing that I didn't hit, then I'll work at night too. But it's kind of like these intense sprints. Like I usually will edit a book in the fall and
Mm.
then will like copy edits slash drafting the next book in the spring. And then
Mm.
summers, the past 2 summers I've kind of had off, which has been
Oh, I
nice.
love that.
But then fall, like my fall, like this fall, I'll be touring and book promo and an edit. So this fall, um,
A
if
lot.
you see me looking crazy out there, you know why.
You look
How
great.
how about you?
Um, I I'm gonna be honest, I'm terrible. I'm not a morning person. I blame homeschool. So I was homeschooled from like first grade all the way to senior year. So the idea of waking up early is just not a thing for me. My mom was also not a morning person, so we kind of slept in a lot. So I wake up pretty late for I think and for mostly authors I know they do wake up earlier, but I wake up pretty late and then I get a cup of tea. I scroll through my social media, catch up on a little bit of celebrity gossip, kind of like relax myself a bit, so that when I approach the page, I'm not too anxious is really my goal because I tend to pick at the things that I write. And I have a bad habit of going back and trying to edit things and fix things before the book is done. I would not recommend doing that. So a lot of it's just kind of me creating an environment where I feel safe enough and relaxed enough to like open the doors creatively. And I tend to like write through the afternoons, and whenever I get stuck, I like to pace around my house. I think my neighbors think I'm nuts. I've seen them like looking at me because I'll just go around in circles in my living room. I mean, I'll walk like 2, 3, 4 miles of just like pacing while I listen to like playlists about my book and think through things. Sometimes I go outside if it's not too hot, but there's something about walking in a circle that really gets my brain going. I don't know. And then I'll drink more tea, get that second burst of caffeine to propel me through like a later writing session. Sometimes I split up my books, so I'm working on two things at a time. I'll do like one thing earlier in the day, one thing later. And then I hit kind of a second wind at nighttime, like a huge night owl. So I will write really late at night. And sometimes I do this thing that's kind of bad where I like to watch like a mindless show. And now I have the Microsoft Word app on my phone, and I'll like just sit there and type on my phone while the show plays in the background. And that's kind of like my like I'm relaxing. Technically the workday's over, but if there's something that's bothering me or I didn't hit a goal I wanted to, I just kind of like do both at the same time. I don't know. It's a bit chaotic.
If it
But
works for you, whatever you're doing is working. Keep going.
that's what I tell myself.
I didn't know you were a celebrity gossip fan.
I love
I will
celebrity
be, all
gossip.
right. Now I'm gonna start texting you about how we mourn this Bennifer part two
Please
breakup. All
do.
right.
Please do.
Now that I know, you actually gave me a really good tip um a long time ago where it said you will light a candle when you're working on a project because like the scent gets you into the mood. And I do that now.
Oh, you did. I'm so glad that was
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah. I do it less because the smoke detector here is like kind of too sensitive. So I'm scared of like the fire alarm going off. But I love, yeah, that was really helpful for me. And I picked it up from someone else. I can't even remember now, but I'm glad. I'm glad that's helpful.
Uh, and I have to shout out Christy DeMeester, who's another amazing author friend of mine who wrote a book called Such a Pretty Smile, which is brilliant. She has a candle company called Scents from Hell, and her
Ooh,
candles are amazing. They're out of this world. So if you need a candle when you're working on a project, I recommend.
that's from hell.
Um, this is a fun one. What are Sloane and Lennon's cocktails of choice at a dinner party? And that's from Liz Caron, who wrote First Light and Night's Edge, the vampire duology, which is
Love those
amazing.
books.
Yeah.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Liz.
I think Lennon would be a gin and tonic, but I feel like that's a drink she'd order because she wanted to appear a bit more cool. And if she was by herself, she'd probably order something like super sweet and like flowery and
Yeah.
over the top. But gin and tonic would be her go-to, I think.
I feel like Sloane orders a drink in the book, and now I can't remember what it is.
It sounded good. I remember this.
Because I remember Naomi, when they go out, Naomi gets a drink called Soylent Green,
Yes,
and because
yes.
they make a joke about it, but I forget what um Sloane gets. I feel like maybe like a Negroni Like Sloane would
Oh,
be,
Bagliato with
yeah,
Prosecco. Oh,
with
sorry,
Prosecco in it.
with Prosecco in
Yeah, we love our celebrity gossip.
it.
I have one just for you. Um, what excites and or frightens you most about this story?
Um, I think what frightens me most is always like handing it over to people. I wrote this book at a pretty like vulnerable time in my life, and it was scared. I was really scared to let this one go, and it was scary. So that yeah, I think putting so much of yourself into a story at a vulnerable time and then releasing it is terrifying. At the same time, it's exhilarating. It's exhilarating to be seen. It's exhilarating when people tell you, "Oh, I've had a similar thought, or I felt a similar way, and this book really touched something in me." So I think it's twofold. Yeah, yeah. And I have one that's just for you here. Um, Okay. Who are some of your favorite vampire characters in films slash TV shows and or books? That's just for you.
I'm in my Lestat era. Like I just watched the Interview with a Vampire series and like I'm obsessed with Lestat and I just think he's one of the most fascinating and vibrant vampire characters. Um and I just love Lestat. I'm all about Lestat right now.
He's great.
I'm gonna find a question for the both of us and then I'll wrap us up. Okay. Do you ladies enjoy the fall horror season since many of your books have a spooky vibe?
I do. I live for this time of year. I'm a Libra. I was born October 5th, and I feel like I took that very, very literally. Like this is my time. Um, I just I don't know. There's something about it. Every fall, I feel like I'm coming home. And I feel like the most myself. So yeah, for me, I love this time of year, and I'm always sad when it ends.
It feels like coming home. That's so sweet. For me, it always feels like back to school. Like there's something about like I'm like 35 and I'm still like there's a chill in the air. I'm like, where are my books? Where's my backpack? Am I late? Like for some reason, I just like shift into this like it feels very like exciting and nerve wracking and like um yeah, it always feels like a new beginning. To me, this
Mhm.
feels like New Year's. Like this feels like I'm starting something. Um, so yeah, and I love fall. I'm like, give me my leather jacket, give me like a hot drink. What's your hot drink? Are you like a PSL? Are you hot apple cider? Are you just tea?
I love a PSL. Love.
Okay.
Only during fall. And then
Yeah.
otherwise I do jasmine green tea every single
Okay.
day. Love that. What about you?
I feel like I'm always like so excited to get a pumpkin spice latte. And like the first sip is like dopamine. And then by like the third sip, I'm like, why do I feel like my body is falling apart? Like it's
So
so I
much
don't know.
sugar.
Yeah, every year I do the same thing. I'm like, and I'm gonna do it this year too. I'm gonna be like my first pumpkin spice, and then I'm gonna have like three sips and be like, uh,
The worst part of a pumpkin spice latte is those last two sips where it's gritty and like all the cinnamon is at the bottom.
yeah,
It's rough.
yeah. But there's something gross, but also like really satisfying.
I agree. I want one now. I'm gonna have to go to Dunkin'
Yeah.
Donuts.
Um, well, thank you, Alexis, for doing this with me. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Um, if you bought a ticket that included a signed copy of So Thirsty or an Academy for Liars, the book will be delivered to you in 8 to 10 business days. Um, in addition, there are copies of So Thirsty and Academy for Liars available at Barnes& and Noble stores and on bnn.com. We hope that you check them out. I wish I'm in a hotel. um, thank you all so much. Thank you, Alexis. The book is amazing.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
And let's do this again next year.
Yes, yes. Congratulations on So Thirsty. I absolutely love this book. And thank you everyone for coming. I had the best time.
Happy spooky season. Bye.